Tennessee is one of the most prominent states in the country today. But did you know that long before Tennessee was ever even dreamt about, another, much smaller state called Franklin almost came into existence? So what is the state of Franklin, and why didn't it succeed at becoming an independent state? As usual, it all begins with the physical geography west of the Appalachians. Now, before a state can be born, there must be a place, a piece of land with features so distinct that they shape the people who inhabit it, their culture, and even their destiny. And for the short-lived, almost forgotten state of Franklin, that place was a rugged expanse of mountains and valleys in what is now northeastern Tennessee. In the late 1700s, for settlers dreaming of a life west of the original colonies, the Appalachians were not the gentle, rolling hills we might picture today. They were a formidable barrier, a great wall of earth and stone that severed the western frontier from the eastern seaboard. And it was the Blue Ridge Mountains that presented the first challenge. This imposing geography created what historians call the Over-Mountain people. They lived on the western side of the Blue Ridge in a land that was technically part of North Carolina, yet functionally disconnected from it. News from the state capital in New Bern traveled at a glacial pace, if it did at all, as did laws, tax collectors, and perhaps most importantly, military protection. The mountains acted as a massive filter, straining out the authority and influence of the state government. It was in this isolation that a new identity was forged. These were not simply North Carolinians who lived in the West. They were a people apart, forced by the sheer topography of their home into a state of self-reliance. They built their own forts, administered their own local justice, and fought their own battles. Of course, if the mountains were the walls of Franklin, the rivers were its lifelines. Running through the towering ridges of the Blue Ridge and the Unaka Mountains were incredibly fertile valleys. The Watauga, the Nolichucky, and the Holston rivers were the arteries of the Franklin settlements. Life didn't spread out evenly across the landscape, but clung to these river banks. The rich alluvial soil of the river bottoms was perfect for growing corn, wheat, and tobacco, allowing the settlements to become not just self-sufficient, but prosperous. These rivers were also the region's first highways. Flatboats and canoes transported goods, families, and ideas between the scattered communities that dotted their banks, from the sycamore shoals on the Watauga to the burgeoning settlements along the Holston. Finally, Franklin's boundaries were largely defined by the Cumberland Plateau to the west. This high, flat-topped tableland rises up from the valley floor, creating a second, less dramatic, but still significant barrier. It separated the dense settlements of the Franklin region from the vast open country of what would become Middle Tennessee. This effectively enclosed the Franklinites in a geographic pocket, bounded by the Blue Ridge to the east and the Cumberland Plateau to the west. It's for this reason that Franklin was originally proposed to be a state, but it didn't become a state. So what happened? The settlers of Franklin were thrown into chaos when they were suddenly cast off by North Carolina. In an instant, their support system vanished, leading them to navigate massive, uncertain change all by themselves. While most of us won't be forming our own states anytime soon, we all face profound moments of change within our lives. That's where BetterHelp comes in, the sponsor of today's video. This year has been defined by one such change for me, transitioning to traveling full-time. It's been an incredible adventure, but uprooting your life also means leaving behind familiar routines and familiar support systems, which can sometimes leave me feeling adrift. That's why having a consistent grounding force is so important, and it's why a service like BetterHelp is so necessary. BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy service, making it easy to connect with a licensed professional therapist no matter where you are. BetterHelp is about having a dedicated space to process change and maintain a sense of stability, no matter what time zone I'm currently in. So, if you're going through your own transition or just need someone to talk to, BetterHelp is a fantastic resource. And you can get started right now. Just fill out their brief questionnaire and you can be matched with a therapist in as little as 2 days. And as part of this sponsorship, you can get 10% off your first month by visiting betterhelp.com/Jeff. A place, no matter how isolated or self-sufficient, does not become a state on its own. It requires a political spark, a moment when the people who inhabit the area decide that their shared identity and common needs must be formalized into a government. For the Over-Mountain people of the 1780s, living in the shadow of the Appalachians, that spark came not from a grand declaration of ideals, but from an act of abandonment. But let's go back to just after the American Revolutionary War ended. The newly formed United States was a loose confederation of states, and the national government was weak and very in debt. North Carolina, like other states, owed a significant sum for its part in the war effort. Looking at their vast, unruly western territory, the land that would become Franklin, state legislators saw more of a burden than an asset. It was expensive to protect from Native American raids, difficult to govern across the mountain barrier, and generated almost no tax revenue. So, in June 1784, they landed on what seemed like an elegant solution. They offered this entire western territory to the federal government to forgive North Carolina's war debt. For the roughly 25,000 settlers on the Watauga, Nolichucky, and Holston rivers, this was a catastrophic betrayal. North Carolina had essentially cast them into political limbo. The state had relinquished its claim, but the federal government had not yet accepted the territory. In this power vacuum, the settlers were left stateless, without legal protection, courts, or even a formal militia. So, feeling completely abandoned, they did what the geography of their home had always taught them to do. They took matters into their own hands. In August 1784, just 2 months later, delegates from the western counties convened in the town of Jonesboro. Their solution to their stateless problem was simple. They would form their own state. Led by the charismatic Revolutionary War hero and frontiersman John Sevier, they drafted a constitution. The name was soon changed to Franklin, a savvy political move designed to curry favor with the influential Benjamin Franklin in their quest for federal recognition. In March 1785, John Sevier was elected governor, and the state of Franklin became a reality. It established its own courts, organized a militia, and negotiated treaties with neighboring Cherokee tribes. For a brief period, the Overmountain people had willed a state into existence. But politics, especially on the frontier, was a fickle thing. Back in North Carolina, many legislators began to have second thoughts about relinquishing their lands. They realized that they had given away an incredibly valuable asset for a pittance. Powerful land speculators, whose claims were based on North Carolina law, feared their titles would be worthless under the new Franklin government. So, in a stunning reversal, the North Carolina legislature repealed their cessions to the federal government in November 1784, just months after passing it. They wanted their western counties back. This set the stage for the country's first civil conflict. Franklin was now an outlaw state in the eyes of North Carolina, and for the next 3 years, two governments operated simultaneously in the same territory. A farmer could be summoned for jury duty by both a Franklin judge and a North Carolina judge. Tax collectors from both governments made their rounds, demanding payment. Allegiance became a daily choice, and society fractured along political lines. This division was personified by two men: Governor John Sevier, the heart of the Franklin independence movement, and Colonel John Tipton, a formidable local leader who became the face of the opposition, fiercely loyal to North Carolina. Ultimately, the state of Franklin was doomed by a trio of converging forces. First, it failed to achieve its most critical goal, federal recognition. Despite Sevier's lobbying, the Continental Congress, fraught with its own internal politics, never voted to admit Franklin into the Union. Without this legitimacy, it was merely a rebellion. Second, the internal divisions worsened as North Carolina shrewdly offered pardons and tax exemptions to anyone who would renounce Franklin and reaffirm their loyalty. Tipton's faction grew as Franklin's authority waned. Finally, the fledgling state was economically unstable, famously passing a law that allowed salaries to be paid in goods like linen, bacon, or deer pelts, a sign of its desperation. The end came not with a vote, but with a whimper and a gunshot. In February 1788, the conflict between the rival governments culminated in the Battle of Franklin, a small-scale siege where Sevier's men surrounded Tipton's farm. The confrontation was a dismal failure for Sevier, and it shattered any authority his government might have had remaining. And so, by 1789, the state of Franklin had collapsed. But Franklin, now known as Western North Carolina, would not remain dead. It would be reanimated as the state we know today as Tennessee, a state that continues to uphold a lot of the values of the original state of Franklin. When the makeshift government of the state of Franklin disintegrated in 1789, its dream of independence appeared, at first, to be gone forever. Its governor, John Sevier, was a pardoned rebel, and its territory was once again under the firm control of North Carolina. But the collapse of Franklin was not the end of the story. It was merely the beginning. The very ideals that animated the lost state, the demand for protection, representation, and self-determination, did not die with it. Instead, they rose from the ashes to become the foundational pillars of a new, permanent state, Tennessee. For all the chaos it brought, the almost state of Franklin taught North Carolina a valuable lesson. It could not effectively govern its western territory across the Appalachian Wall. The experiment to do so had been costly and embarrassing. And so, just months after Franklin's collapse, a newly assertive federal government, now operating under a much stronger constitution, provided a new path forward. In late 1789, North Carolina ceded its western lands for good. This act created the Territory of the United States south of the River Ohio, more commonly known as the Southwest Territory. This was a crucial intermediate step that Franklinites never had. Instead of being neglected by a distant state capital, the settlers were now under the direct supervision and protection of the federal government. President George Washington appointed William Blount, a respected North Carolina politician, as the territorial governor. As it turns out, becoming a territory was exactly what the original Franklinites needed. With it, the settlers finally received the support they desired. Federal funds and troops helped secure the frontier against raids, an issue that had been a primary catalyst for the original independence movement. And the federal government established a clear and orderly process for settling lands claimed, bringing an end to the legal chaos that had plagued the region under dual government. Most importantly, the territory was granted a legislature, giving the people the political representation they had been denied by North Carolina. With this newfound stability, the population boomed. Settlers poured over the mountains and down the valleys, confident that their new homes were secure and their rights protected. By 1795, the territory's population had surged past 60,000, the minimum threshold required for statehood under the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. The groundwork laid during the tumultuous Franklin years was now bearing legitimate fruit. The demand for self-rule, once a radical act of rebellion, was now a legal and achievable goal. Governor Blount called for a constitutional convention, which met in Knoxville in early 1796. The delegates, many of them former Franklinites, drafted one of the most progressive and democratic constitutions of its day. They chose the name Tennessee, derived from the Cherokee word Tanasi, a name for a prominent village, forever grounding the new state's identity in the region's indigenous history. In a final show of the frontier defiance that defined their character, they did not wait for an invitation from Congress. They declared themselves a state, elected their officials, and sent their new senators and representative to the national capital in Philadelphia, essentially demanding admission. After some debate, Congress acquiesced. On June 1st, 1796, Tennessee was officially welcomed into the Union as the 16th state. Today, Tennessee is one of the largest states in the country by population, with over 7 million people. But had Franklin been successful in its early endeavors, the very idea of Tennessee might have been forever changed. At the very least, we'd have one additional, very small state tucked into the South. Franklin failed as a state, but it succeeded as a catalyst. In many ways, it was a dress rehearsal for state and territorial expansion west of the Appalachians. While it failed at first, its legacy through Tennessee has been very successful. This week, I'm in Estonia, and if you're interested in what the Baltic country looks and feels like today, then you should come join me over on my travel channel. I hope you enjoyed learning all about the lost state of Franklin. If you did, check out this video all about why Tennessee has so many more people than Kentucky. Thanks for watching. See you next time.